Sarah Martinez walked through the hallways of Lincoln High School with her head held high, even though whispers followed her everywhere. Her army camouflage jacket hung loose over her thin frame, the fabric worn soft from years of wear. Most students her age were worried about the latest fashion trends or who was dating whom, but Sarah had different concerns weighing on her mind. "Look, it's Army Girl again," Jessica Chen whispered loud enough for half the hallway to hear. "Does she even own normal clothes?" Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. The camouflage jacket wasn't a fashion statement or an attempt to look tough. It was all she had left of her father, Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, who had died in Afghanistan 3 years ago when Sarah was just 14. The jacket still smelled faintly of his cologne, even after all this time. Sarah's mother, Elena, had wanted to put it away in storage with the rest of his military gear, but Sarah couldn't bear to part with it. Wearing it made her feel like her father was still protecting her, still there to offer guidance when the world felt too big and scary. "Hey, Martinez," called out Brad Thompson, the quarterback of the football team. "You planning to invade the cafeteria today?" His friends laughed, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She pushed through the crowd toward her locker, trying to ignore the snickers and pointing fingers. At 17, Sarah was used to being different. While other kids complained about homework and curfews, she worked part-time at the local grocery store to help her mother pay rent. Sarah's best friend, Amy Rodriguez, appeared at her side like a guardian angel. "Ignore them," Amy said, linking her arm through Sarah's. "They're just jealous because you actually stand for something." "Stand for what?" Sarah asked, spinning the combination on her locker. "Being the weird girl whose dad died?" "Standing for honor and sacrifice," Amy replied firmly. "Your dad was a hero, Sarah. That jacket represents something these kids could never understand." Sarah pulled out her history textbook, its pages marked with yellow sticky notes. She was one of the top students in her class, despite working 20 hours a week at Morrison's Market. Her mother Elena worked double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital, and together they barely made ends meet. The military death benefits helped, but they didn't stretch far in their expensive California town. "Are you coming to the football game Friday?" Amy asked as they walked toward their first period class. Sarah shrugged. "I have to work. Mrs. Morrison needs me to cover the evening shift." "You work too much," Amy said with concern. "You're 17, Sarah. You should be having fun." "Fun doesn't pay for groceries," Sarah replied, though she tried to keep her tone light. In truth, Sarah often felt much older than her 17 years. While her classmates worried about prom dresses and college parties, she had been managing household finances and helping her mother through depression since her father's death. The responsibility felt heavy sometimes, but it also gave her a sense of purpose. During lunch, Sarah sat with Amy and a few other students who didn't judge her for being different. The cafeteria was divided into clear social groups: the popular kids, the athletes, the theater students, and the academic overachievers. Sarah didn't quite fit into any category, which suited her fine. "Did you hear about the Veterans Day assembly next week?" asked Marcus Thompson, Brad's younger brother who was nothing like his arrogant sibling. Marcus was quiet and thoughtful, with a genuine interest in military history. "What about it?" Sarah asked, picking at her sandwich. The bread was a day old, but it was all they could afford. "They're bringing in a bunch of veterans to speak," Marcus explained. "My mom is helping organize it." She asked if any students wanted to participate, maybe share stories about family members who served. Sarah's stomach twisted. She had carefully avoided any school events that might put her military connection in the spotlight. The last thing she wanted was more attention or, worse, pity from her classmates. "I think you should do it," Amy said encouragingly. "People need to hear about your dad." "I don't think so," Sarah replied quickly. "I'm not good at public speaking." The truth was more complicated. Sarah was terrified of breaking down in front of the entire school. She had worked so hard to maintain her composure, to be strong for her mother and herself. The thought of sharing her father's story and potentially crying in front of students who already mocked her was overwhelming. After lunch, Sarah had her favorite class, Advanced Placement History, with Mr. Peterson. He was a Vietnam veteran who understood Sarah's situation better than most teachers. He never made a big deal about her father's service, but he often gave her meaningful looks when they studied military conflicts. Today we're discussing the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, Mr. Peterson announced to the class. Can anyone tell me about the current situation in Afghanistan? Several students raised their hands, but Sarah kept hers down. She knew more about Afghanistan than anyone in the room, but not from textbooks. She knew about it from her father's letters, from the stories he had shared during their video calls, from the nightmares that still haunted her mother. Sarah, Mr. Peterson said gently, you've been quiet today. Do you have any thoughts on this topic? The classroom fell silent. Everyone knew about Sarah's father, though most pretended not to care. Sarah felt 25 pairs of eyes watching her, waiting to see if she would crack. It's complicated, Sarah said carefully. The situation affects real families, real people. It's not just politics or strategy. It's about sons and daughters, mothers and fathers who don't come home. Her voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. She thought about her father's last letter, which had arrived 2 days after the notification officers came to their door. In it, he had written about how much he missed her laugh and how proud he was of her strength. After class, Mr. Peterson asked Sarah to stay behind. You know, he said, organizing papers on his desk, your perspective would be valuable at the Veterans Day Assembly. I'm not ready for that, Sarah replied honestly. Sometimes we're never ready for the things we need to do, Mr. Peterson said. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do them. That evening, Sarah walked home from work as the sun set behind the California hills. Her feet ached from standing for 6 hours, and she still had homework waiting for her. The camouflage jacket provided little warmth against the October chill, but she pulled it tighter around herself anyway. Their apartment was small and sparse, but her mother had made it feel like home with family photos and her father's military commendations displayed proudly on the living room wall. Elena was already asleep on the couch, still wearing her scrubs from her shift at the hospital. Sarah covered her mother with a blanket and quietly made herself a sandwich for dinner. She sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks, and tried to focus on her calculus homework. But her mind kept drifting to the Veterans Day Assembly and Marcus's words about sharing stories. Maybe Amy was right. Maybe people did need to hear about her father. Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez had been more than just a soldier, he had been a devoted husband and father who coached Little League baseball and helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. He had joined the army to serve his country and provide for his family, never imagining he wouldn't come home to see his daughter graduate. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos of her father. In one, he was wearing the same camouflage jacket she now wore, grinning broadly as he held a fish he had caught during a camping trip. In another, he was teaching her how to change a tire, his patient smile visible even in the grainy phone camera quality. A text message from Amy interrupted her memories, thinking about you. You're stronger than you know. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. Amy had been her anchor through the worst times, never judging Sarah's family situation or making her feel like a charity case. In a school full of students who seemed to have everything handed to them, Amy understood what it meant to struggle. The next morning brought more of the same treatment from her classmates. As Sarah walked to her locker, she overheard a group of girls discussing their weekend plans. My dad is taking me shopping for homecoming dresses, said Brittany Walsh, flipping her perfectly styled blonde hair. We're going to that boutique in Beverly Hills. Lucky, replied Jessica. My parents are being so cheap lately. They say I can only spend $500. Sarah tried not to roll her eyes. $500 was more than she and her mother spent on groceries in 2 months. She thought about her own homecoming prospects, which were non-existent. Even if someone asked her, which was unlikely, she couldn't afford a dress or a ticket. Earth to Army girl, Brad called out as she passed. You planning to wear that jacket to homecoming too? At least she'd be dressed appropriately for war, Jessica added with a cruel laugh. This time, Sarah stopped and turned to face them. You know what? Yes, I probably would wear this jacket. Because it represents something bigger than your petty high school drama. The hallway grew quiet. Students stopped their conversations to watch the confrontation. It represents my father, who died serving people like you, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. People who take their freedom for granted while complaining about $500 spending limits. Brad's face reddened. Don't lecture me about freedom, Martinez. My tax dollars probably pay for your food stamps. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her family didn't receive food stamps, but they had applied for free lunch at school. The shame and anger boiled up inside her, but before she could respond, Amy appeared. "Back off, Brad," Amy said firmly. "At least Sarah knows what real sacrifice looks like." "Whatever," Brad muttered, walking away with his friends. "Freaks stick together, I guess." Sarah felt tears threatening and hurried to the bathroom. Amy followed, finding her splashing cold water on her face. "He's an idiot," Amy said softly. "Don't let him get to you." "Maybe he's right," Sarah whispered. "Maybe I am just a freak who can't let go of the past." "Your father died 3 years ago, Sarah." 3 years. That's not ancient history. You're allowed to grieve, and you're allowed to honor his memory however you want. Sarah looked at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her father's jacket hung on her small frame like armor. She looked tired, older than her 17 years, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before Brad's cruel words. "Maybe it is time to tell people about him," Sarah said quietly. "You mean the assembly?" Sarah nodded. "Dad always said that the best way to honor the fallen is to make sure their stories don't die with them." That afternoon, Sarah found Marcus in the library and told him she wanted to participate in the Veterans Day Assembly. His face lit up with genuine excitement. "That's amazing, Sarah. My mom will be so happy to hear it. She's been hoping a student would step forward." "What would I need to do?" Sarah asked nervously. "Just share your dad's story. Maybe talk about what his service meant to your family. It doesn't have to be long or fancy." Sarah spent the weekend thinking about what she would say. She pulled out boxes of her father's things that her mother had stored in the closet, his letters, photos, and the flag that had covered his coffin. Each item told part of his story, but Sarah wanted to share the man behind the uniform. On Monday morning, she walked into school with a new sense of purpose. The whispers and stares continued, but they bothered her less. She had decided to stop hiding from who she was and where she came from. During lunch, she sat with Amy and Marcus, discussing her plans for the assembly presentation. "I want to talk about how he wasn't just a soldier," Sarah explained. "He was a dad who read me bedtime stories and taught me to ride a bike. He was a husband who brought my mom flowers every Friday. He was a neighbor who shoveled snow for elderly people." "That's beautiful," Amy said. "People need to hear that." "I'm scared I'll cry," Sarah admitted. "So what if you do?" Marcus replied. "Crying doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The week passed quickly, and soon it was Friday, the day of the Veterans Day Assembly. Sarah had written and rewritten her speech a dozen times, finally settling on something that felt honest and true to her father's memory. She wore her camouflage jacket, of course, but this time it felt different. Instead of wearing it as protection from the world's cruelty, she was wearing it as a badge of honor, a connection to something bigger than high school gossip and social hierarchies. As students filed into the gymnasium for the assembly, Sarah noticed several veterans in the audience. Some wore parts of their old uniforms, others sat in wheelchairs, and a few had service dogs by their sides. The sight of them made Sarah's heart pound with nervousness and anticipation. Principal Williams introduced the program and thanked the veterans for their service. Then, Marcus's mother, Mrs. Thompson, took the stage to introduce the student speaker. "Today, we have a very special young woman who wants to share her father's story," Mrs. Thompson announced. Sarah Martinez is a senior here at Lincoln High, and her father, Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, made the ultimate sacrifice while serving in Afghanistan. Sarah stood up from her seat in the front row, her legs feeling unsteady. As she walked toward the stage, she could feel hundreds of eyes watching her. Some were curious, some were sympathetic, and some, like Brad's, were skeptical. She reached the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. Her mother sat in the audience, having taken time off work to attend. Elena's eyes were already glistening with tears, but she smiled encouragingly at her daughter. Sarah adjusted the microphone and began to speak, her voice clear and strong despite her nervousness. 3 years ago, 2 officers in dress uniforms knocked on our door, she began. They told my mother and me that Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez had been killed in action while serving his country in Afghanistan. The gymnasium fell completely silent. Even the usual troublemakers seemed to be paying attention. "But that's not the story I want to tell you today," Sarah continued. I want to tell you about the man who taught me that real strength comes from serving others, not from tearing them down." Sarah's voice carried across the silent gymnasium as she continued her speech. Every word felt like it was coming directly from her heart, and she could see that her classmates were truly listening for perhaps the first time since she had started wearing her father's jacket. "My father wasn't born to be a soldier," Sarah said, gripping the sides of the podium. "He grew up in a small town in Texas, the son of immigrants who worked in the fields to give their children better opportunities. Miguel Martinez dreamed of being a teacher, but when I was born, he realized he needed to provide for his family in a different way." She paused, looking out at the audience. Her mother Elena sat in the third row, tears streaming down her face but her expression filled with pride. Amy gave her an encouraging thumbs up from her seat with the other students. "He enlisted in the army when I was 5 years old," Sarah continued. "I remember the day he left for basic training. I cried and begged him not to go, but he knelt down and explained that sometimes we have to do hard things to protect the people we love." Principal Williams watched from the side of the stage, clearly moved by Sarah's words. Several teachers were wiping their eyes, and even some of the students who had mocked Sarah were listening intently. For the next 9 years, Dad served 3 tours overseas. Every deployment was hard on our family, but he never complained. During his time off, he volunteered at the local youth center, teaching kids how to play baseball and helping them with their homework. He said that serving your country didn't end when you took off the uniform. Sarah's voice wavered slightly, but she steadied herself by thinking about her father's strength. He had faced enemy fire and dangerous missions without flinching. She could certainly handle speaking to her classmates. "The jacket I wear every day was his. People have made fun of me for it, called me names, and suggested that I should move on. But this jacket represents the values my father lived by: courage, honor, sacrifice, and love for others. When I wear it, I'm reminded that I come from a family that believes in something bigger than ourselves." She could see Brad Thompson shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Next to him, his younger brother Marcus was watching Sarah with obvious admiration and respect. "3 years ago, my father was leading a patrol in Afghanistan when his unit came under attack. According to the report we received, he could have taken cover and waited for backup. Instead, he drew enemy fire away from his younger soldiers, giving them time to reach safety. Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez died saving the lives of 3 soldiers who were barely older than me." The gymnasium was so quiet that Sarah could hear the heating system humming in the background. She had never spoken about the details of her father's death before, not even to Amy or her mother. "Those 3 soldiers came to his funeral," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "They told my mother and me that Dad had talked about us constantly. He carried pictures of our family in his helmet and shared stories about my soccer games and school plays with anyone who would listen. They said he was planning to surprise me by coming home early for my 15th birthday." Elena let out a small sob from the audience, and several other people were openly crying now. Even Mr. Peterson, the tough Vietnam veteran who taught history, was wiping his eyes. "I wear this jacket not because I'm trying to be different or get attention," Sarah said, looking directly at the students who had tormented her. "I wear it because it connects me to my father's values. He believed that we should stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. He believed that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." Sarah paused and looked around the gymnasium. She could see veterans nodding in agreement, teachers smiling through their tears, and students who had never really looked at her before suddenly seeing her in a new light. "Every day, I try to live by the example my father set. I work part-time to help my mother pay our bills, not because I have to, but because that's what family does for each other. I study hard because education was important to him. And, yes, I wear his jacket because it reminds me that even when people misunderstand you, you should never stop believing in what's right." The applause started slowly, with just a few people clapping. But it quickly spread throughout the gymnasium until everyone was on their feet. Sarah stood at the podium, overwhelmed by the response, as the ovation continued for several minutes. As she walked back to her seat, several classmates reached out to touch her arm or whisper words of support. For the first time since starting high school, Sarah felt like she truly belonged. The assembly continued with speeches from local veterans, but Sarah barely heard them. She was processing what had just happened and how different she felt after finally sharing her father's story. After the ceremony ended, Sarah was surprised by how many people approached her. Veterans thanked her for honoring her father's memory, teachers complimented her courage, and classmates who had never spoken to her before wanted to ask questions about her father and his service. "Sarah," called a voice behind her as she gathered her things. She turned to see Mrs. Rodriguez, the school counselor, walking toward her with a warm smile. "That was an incredible speech," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "I had no idea what you and your family had been through. Have you ever considered applying for military scholarships? With your grades and your family's service record, you would be very competitive." Sarah blinked in surprise. "I honestly hadn't thought about it. College seems so expensive, and we're barely managing as it is." "Let's talk next week," Mrs. Rodriguez suggested. "There are programs specifically designed to help families like yours. Your father's sacrifice has earned you opportunities, and you deserve to know about them." As Sarah walked toward the exit, she noticed Brad Thompson standing by himself near the gymnasium doors. He looked uncomfortable and kept glancing in her direction as if he wanted to say something. Finally, he approached her. "Hey, Martinez," he said, his usual arrogant tone replaced by something that sounded almost humble. "What?" Sarah replied, preparing herself for another cruel comment. That was really something," Brad said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I didn't know about your dad. I mean, I knew he died, but I didn't know how." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of sarcasm or meanness, but she didn't see any. "Look," Brad continued, "I've been a real jerk to you. I don't know what I thought. Maybe that you were just trying to get attention or something. But after hearing that story, I realize I was completely wrong." "Thank you," Sarah said simply. She could have lectured him about the months of cruel comments and embarrassment, but something in his genuine remorse made her choose forgiveness instead. "If you ever want to come to one of our games or something," Brad added awkwardly, "you'd be welcome. And maybe people would lay off the stupid comments." As Sarah left the school building, she felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of carrying her father's memory alone had been crushing at times, but sharing his story had somehow made the burden easier to bear. That evening, Sarah arrived home to find her mother cooking dinner, which was unusual since Elena typically worked late on Fridays. "I took the evening off," Elena explained, stirring a pot of her famous chicken soup. "After hearing your speech today, I realized we haven't been talking enough about your father. I've been so focused on just surviving that I forgot we should also be celebrating his life." They sat at the kitchen table, eating soup and looking through photo albums they hadn't opened since the funeral. Elena shared stories Sarah had never heard before: how Miguel had proposed during a rainstorm, how he had cried when Sarah took her first steps, how he had called home every single day during his deployments just to hear their voices. "He would be so proud of what you did today," Elena said, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You honored his memory in a way that I never could." "We both honor him," Sarah replied. "You by taking care of people at the hospital, and me by trying to live up to his example." The weekend brought unexpected changes in Sarah's social life. Amy called early Saturday morning, practically shouting with excitement. "You will never believe what happened," Amy exclaimed. "Marcus Thompson called me last night. He wants to know if you would be interested in starting a military appreciation club at school." "A what?" Sarah asked, still groggy from sleep. "A club for students who have family members in the military, or who just want to support veterans. Marcus thinks there are probably other students like you who have been hiding their connections to the military because they were afraid of being made fun of." Sarah sat up in bed, suddenly, wide awake. "Really? He thinks other students would be interested?" Apparently, 3 different people approached him after the assembly yesterday asking how they could get involved with military support activities. And, get this, Brad Thompson wants to help too. Brad? The same Brad who's been making my life miserable for 3 years? The very same. Marcus says his older brother had a complete change of heart after your speech. Something about realizing how his words had been hurting someone who was already dealing with loss. Sarah spent the weekend thinking about the possibility of starting a military support club. The idea excited and terrified her in equal measure. On one hand, it would give her a chance to honor her father's memory in a more organized way. On the other hand, it would put her even more in the spotlight. On Monday morning, Sarah arrived at school to find Marcus waiting by her locker with a folder full of papers. "I've been researching what it would take to start an official club," he said, his enthusiasm evident in his voice. "We'd need a faculty sponsor, at least 10 students to sign up, and we'd have to submit a proposal to the student council." 10 students? Sarah asked doubtfully. "Are you sure we could find that many people? Are you kidding?" Marcus laughed. "I've already got a list of 15 people who want to join." "Apparently, your speech inspired a lot of students to think about military service and sacrifice differently." During lunch, Marcus introduced Sarah to several students she hadn't expected to be interested in military support. There was Jennifer Kim, whose brother was stationed in Germany, David Chen, whose grandfather had served in Vietnam, Maria Gonzalez, whose uncle had been wounded in Iraq, and several other students who had family connections to the military. "I never talked about my brother before," Jennifer explained quietly. "People at this school seem to think military service is something only poor people do. I was embarrassed to admit that my brother chose the army over college." "My grandfather never talked about Vietnam," David added. "But, after hearing your speech, I called him this weekend. We talked for 3 hours about his service. I learned more about my family history in one conversation than I had in my entire life." Mr. Peterson agreed to sponsor the club, and Principal Williams fast-tracked their proposal through the student council approval process. Within 2 weeks, the Lincoln High Military Appreciation Club held its first official meeting. 23 students attended, far more than Sarah had ever imagined possible. They discussed plans for supporting local veterans, organizing care packages for deployed soldiers, and creating a memorial garden on school grounds to honor fallen service members. "I want our first project to be something that would make your father proud," Marcus said during the meeting. "He always believed in helping people," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "Maybe we could organize a food drive for military families, or volunteer at the VA hospital." The club decided to do both, and they spent the following weeks planning their activities. Sarah found herself in the strange position of being a leader among her peers, something she had never imagined possible during her years as an outsider. The changes in Sarah's social life were remarkable but gradual. Students who had previously ignored or mocked her now greeted her in the hallways. Teachers took more interest in her academic performance and future plans. Even Brad Thompson made an effort to be friendly, though their interactions remained somewhat awkward. More importantly, Sarah began to see herself differently. Instead of feeling ashamed of her father's military service and her family's struggles, she started to view them as sources of strength and character. The jacket that had once felt like a target on her back now felt like armor that protected her from petty cruelty and gave her confidence to stand up for others. 1 month after the Veterans Day assembly, Sarah received a letter that would change her life completely. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while she was at work, and her mother called the store in tears. "Sarah, you need to come home right away," Elena said, her voice shaking with emotion. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, immediately fearing the worst. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Just come home." Sarah rushed home to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table with an official-looking letter and several brochures spread out in front of her. "What is this?" Sarah asked. "It's from the Army," Elena said, her voice filled with wonder. "They're offering you a full scholarship to any college you want to attend." Sarah picked up the letter with trembling hands and read it slowly. The scholarship would cover tuition, books, room and board, and provide a monthly stipend for living expenses. In return, she would need to serve as an officer in the Army for 4 years after graduation. "Mrs. Rodriguez submitted your information to the scholarship committee," Elena explained, "along with copies of your speech from the assembly and letters of recommendation from your teachers." Sarah sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the opportunity before her. College had seemed like an impossible dream just a few weeks ago, something for other people who had money and connections. Now she was looking at a path that would not only make her education possible but also allow her to follow in her father's footsteps of military service. "What do you think Dad would want me to do?" Sarah asked her mother. Elena smiled through her tears. "I think he'd want you to choose whatever makes you happy. But I also think he'd be proud to know that his daughter was carrying on the tradition of service." As Sarah held the scholarship letter, she thought about how much her life had changed since the Veterans Day assembly. She had gone from being the lonely girl in the camouflage jacket to being a leader and an inspiration to others. More importantly, she had learned that honoring her father's memory didn't require hiding from the world, it required engaging with it and making it better. The decision about the scholarship would wait for a few more weeks while Sarah researched colleges and career options. But, for the first time since her father's death, she felt like her future was bright with possibilities rather than limited by circumstances. Winter came early to Lincoln High that year, bringing with it new challenges that tested Sarah's newfound confidence. The military scholarship offer had given her hope for the future, but it also brought pressure she hadn't expected. Students who had previously ignored her now seemed to have opinions about her life choices, and not all of them were supportive. "So you're really going to join the army?" asked Stephanie Walsh during chemistry class, her voice carrying a tone of barely concealed disapproval. "After what happened to your father?" Sarah carefully measured chemicals for their experiment before responding. "My father believed in serving something bigger than himself. That belief didn't die with him." "But, you could get killed," Stephanie pressed, apparently oblivious to how insensitive her comment was. "Why would you choose that when you're smart enough to do anything else?" Other students in the lab had stopped their work to listen. Sarah felt familiar heat rising in her cheeks, but this time it was anger rather than embarrassment. "Freedom isn't free," Sarah replied, using one of her father's favorite phrases. "Someone has to be willing to defend it, or people like you wouldn't have the luxury of questioning that choice." The chemistry lab fell silent except for the bubbling of various experiments. Even Mr. Harrison, the teacher, seemed interested in how the conversation would play out. "I just think it's sad," Stephanie continued, apparently unable to recognize when she should stop talking. "Your father died for nothing, and now you're going to follow the same path." This time, Sarah set down her beaker and turned to face Stephanie directly. "My father died protecting soldiers who came home to their families. He died so that people like you can sleep safely at night without ever having to think about the threats our country faces. That's not nothing, that's everything." Amy, who was Sarah's lab partner, placed a supportive hand on her arm. "Maybe we should focus on our experiment," she suggested diplomatically. But Sarah wasn't finished. Months of holding back her true feelings had taught her the value of speaking up when it mattered. "And, for your information, Stephanie, I'm not following my father's path because I can't think of anything else to do. I'm choosing it because I've seen what real sacrifice looks like, and I want to be worthy of that legacy." The discussion ended when Mr. Harrison announced that lab time was over, but Sarah's words had clearly made an impact on her classmates. Several students approached her after class to express their support or ask questions about military service. The Military Appreciation Club had grown to 35 members and was becoming one of the most active organizations at Lincoln High. Their first major project, a food drive for military families, had collected over 2,000 pounds of groceries and caught the attention of the local newspaper. "We've been invited to present our club activities to the school board," Marcus announced during their weekly meeting in Mr. Peterson's classroom. "They want to use Lincoln High as a model for other schools in the district." Sarah felt a flutter of nervous excitement. 6 months ago, she had been invisible at school except when people wanted to mock her. Now she was being asked to represent her school to district administrators. "Who's going to do the presentation?" asked Jennifer Kim. All eyes turned to Sarah, which both thrilled and terrified her. Public speaking was getting easier, but the stakes kept getting higher. "I think Sarah should do it," said David Chen. "She's the reason most of us joined the club in the first place." "I don't know," Sarah replied hesitantly. "Maybe Marcus should do it. He's been organizing most of our activities." "But, you're our inspiration," Marcus insisted. "Your story is what makes people understand why this club matters." After the meeting, Sarah walked home through the December chill, thinking about how much responsibility she had taken on. Between the club presidency, her part-time job, maintaining her grades, and now potentially giving presentations to the school board, she sometimes felt overwhelmed. At home, she found her mother in the kitchen preparing dinner while talking on the phone with her own mother in Texas. Sarah's grandmother had been calling more frequently since learning about the scholarship opportunity. "Here she is now," Elena said, handing the phone to Sarah. "Your grandmother wants to talk to you." "Mija," came her grandmother's warm voice through the phone. "Your mother tells me you might be going to college after all." "Maybe, abuela. If I decide to accept the scholarship." "Your father would be so proud," her grandmother continued. "But, I want you to know that whatever you decide, you have our support. You don't have to carry the weight of his memory alone." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Since her father's death, she had often felt like she was the only one responsible for keeping his legacy alive. Hearing her grandmother's words reminded her that she was part of a larger family that shared the burden and the pride.
Thank you, abuela. That means everything to me.
Later that evening, as Sarah worked on her calculus homework, her mother sat down across from her at the kitchen table. I need to tell you something, Elena said, her expression serious.
I've been offered a job at a hospital in San Antonio.
Better pay, better benefits, and we'd be close to your grandmother. Sarah looked up from her equations, surprised. That's wonderful, Mom.
Why do you look worried about it? Because it would mean moving before you graduate.
I know how important the club has become to you, and how settled you finally are at Lincoln High. The possibility of moving had never occurred to Sarah. Just when she was finding her place and making a difference, the idea of starting over somewhere else felt overwhelming.
When would we have to decide? Sarah asked.
They want an answer by the end of January. The position would start in March. Sarah stared at her homework, but the numbers blurred together as she tried to process this new development. Moving would mean leaving Amy, abandoning the military club she had worked so hard to build, and starting her senior year at a new school where nobody knew her story. But it would also mean her mother could have better opportunities and they could be near family again.
Sarah had learned from her father that sometimes personal sacrifice was necessary for the good of the family. What do you want to do, Mom? Sarah asked finally.
I want whatever is best for both of us, Elena replied.
But, honestly, the job would solve a lot of our financial problems. And, being near family again.
She trailed off, but Sarah could see the longing in her mother's eyes. The next few weeks brought a flurry of activity as Sarah tried to balance her regular responsibilities with preparation for the school board presentation. She spent hours researching military support programs at other schools and gathering data about their club's impact on student awareness and community involvement.
Amy helped her practice the presentation, acting as a mock school board and asking challenging questions. What makes your club different from other community service organizations?
Amy asked, reading from a list of potential questions they had developed. Our focus on military appreciation creates a bridge between civilian and military communities, Sarah replied, consulting her notes. Many students have family members in the military but don't feel comfortable talking about it. Our club gives them a safe space to share their experiences and concerns.
How do you measure the success of your programs? Amy continued.
We track participation numbers, feedback from veterans and military families, and donations collected. But the real measure of success is the change in school culture. Students are more respectful when discussing military topics, and we've seen a decrease in negative comments about military service. As the presentation date approached, Sarah received unexpected support from a surprising source. Brad Thompson approached her after lunch one day with a serious expression. I heard you're presenting to the school board next week, he said.
News travels fast, Sarah replied, still somewhat wary of Brad's intentions despite his recent change in behavior.
I want to help, Brad said simply. Maybe I could come to the presentation and talk about how the club changed my perspective.
Sarah stared at him in amazement. You want to publicly admit that you were wrong about military service?
I want to publicly admit that I was wrong about you, Brad corrected.
And about a lot of other things.
Your club didn't just teach me about military appreciation, it taught me about treating people with respect regardless of their background.
The school board presentation was scheduled for the first Tuesday evening in January.
Sarah arrived at the district office building wearing her father's camouflage jacket, which had become her symbol of strength and determination. Elena took time off work to attend, and several club members came to show their support. The presentation room was larger than Sarah had expected, with school board members seated at an imposing curved desk and community members filling rows of chairs behind her.
Sarah recognized several teachers from Lincoln High and was surprised to see some parents she didn't know.
Good evening, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm here to talk about how the Lincoln High Military Appreciation Club is changing our school culture and our community.
She clicked through slides showing photos from their various projects, the food drive, visits to the VA hospital, letters written to deployed soldiers, and a mentorship program they had started with local veterans.
6 months ago, military service was rarely discussed at our school except in negative terms, Sarah continued.
Students with military family members often felt ashamed or isolated.
Veterans visiting our campus were treated with polite indifference rather than genuine respect. A school board member raised her hand. What specific changes have you observed? Our club has grown from 15 initial members to 42 active participants, Sarah replied. We've collected over 3,000 pounds of food for military families, written more than 500 letters to deployed soldiers, and logged over 800 hours of volunteer service at the VA hospital. She paused to let the numbers sink in before continuing. But the statistics don't tell the whole story. The real change is in how students talk to each other and think about service. We've created a culture where military sacrifice is honored rather than ignored, where students feel proud of their family's service rather than embarrassed by it. Brad Thompson was the next speaker, and Sarah watched nervously as he approached the podium. She still couldn't quite believe he was voluntarily supporting her cause. I'm Brad Thompson, senior class president at Lincoln High, he began. 6 months ago, I was one of the students who made fun of Sarah Martinez for wearing her father's military jacket to school. Sarah could see some school board members exchange surprised glances. I thought military service was something that only people without other options chose, Brad continued. I made cruel comments and treated Sarah like she was beneath my notice. I was completely wrong. He went on to describe how Sarah's Veterans Day speech had changed his understanding of military sacrifice and how the club had taught him to think differently about service and respect. Sarah Martinez has shown our entire school what real leadership looks like, Brad concluded. She turned personal tragedy into community service and taught all of us what it means to honor those who sacrifice for others. The presentation continued with testimonials from other club members and a veteran who had worked with their hospital volunteer program. By the time Sarah delivered her closing remarks, she could see that the school board members were genuinely impressed. Military families often feel disconnected from their civilian communities, Sarah said in conclusion. Our club builds bridges between these groups and helps everyone understand that we're all part of the same American family. We hope other schools in the district will adopt similar programs so that more students can learn about the value of service and sacrifice. The school board voted unanimously to recommend the Military Appreciation Club model to all high schools in the district. Sarah left the meeting feeling proud and accomplished, but also somewhat sad. If her family moved to Texas, she would be leaving behind all the progress she had made. The decision about moving became more urgent when Elena received a follow-up call from the San Antonio hospital. They were willing to provide a moving bonus and help with relocation expenses if she could start by early February. I think we should go, Sarah told her mother that evening as they discussed the opportunity. This job could change our whole financial situation, and being near family would be good for both of us. But what about your club? What about graduation with your friends? Elena asked. The club will continue without me. Marcus and the others are great leaders. And Amy will always be my best friend, no matter where we live. Sarah had made her decision based on what she thought was best for her family, but it still felt like giving up something important just when she was making the biggest impact. 2 weeks later, as Sarah was cleaning out her locker in preparation for the move, Amy found her surrounded by books and papers. I still can't believe you're leaving, Amy said sadly. It feels like you're just hitting your stride here. Maybe that's the point, Sarah replied, packing her father's photo carefully in her backpack. Maybe I've learned everything I needed to learn here, and now it's time to take that knowledge somewhere else. You're going to start over again in Texas. New school, new classmates who don't know your story. Sarah considered this, then smiled. Actually, I think that might be exciting. I get to choose how to introduce myself instead of fighting against assumptions people have already made. As they walked through the hallways one last time, Sarah reflected on how much the school had changed for her over the past few months. Students who had once avoided her now stopped to wish her luck. We wanted you to have something that honored your dad but was also from us, Brad explained. You taught us all what real courage looks like. As Sarah prepared to leave Lincoln High for the last time, she realized that her story wasn't ending, it was just beginning a new chapter. She had learned that wearing her father's jacket wasn't about hiding behind his memory, but about carrying forward his values. The lessons she had learned about courage, leadership, and standing up for others would serve her well wherever life took her next. The move to Texas would be another test of her resilience, but Sarah felt ready for whatever challenges awaited her. She had discovered her own strength and purpose, and she knew that her father's legacy would continue to guide her path forward. The move to San Antonio came faster than Sarah had expected. Within 3 weeks, she and her mother had packed their small apartment, said their goodbyes, and driven across 3 states to start their new life in Texas. Roosevelt High School was larger than Lincoln High, with over 2,000 students from diverse backgrounds that reflected San Antonio's rich cultural heritage.
Sarah's first day at her new school was deliberately low-key.
She chose to wear regular jeans and a simple blue sweater instead of her father's camouflage jacket, wanting to observe the social dynamics before deciding how much of her story to share. The jacket was safely packed in her bedroom closet, but she wasn't ready to make it her signature again just yet. "Welcome to Roosevelt High," said Mrs. Garcia, the guidance counselor who was helping Sarah with her class schedule.
"I see you're transferring from California as a senior. That must be challenging." "It's an adjustment," Sarah replied diplomatically. "But I'm looking forward to new opportunities."
Mrs. Garcia reviewed Sarah's transcript, her eyebrows rising as she noticed the academic achievements and extracurricular leadership positions.
"You've clearly been very involved at your previous school.
We'd love to have you participate in student government here, or perhaps start a new club if you have any interests we don't already serve." Sarah thought about the Military Appreciation Club she had left behind at Lincoln High, but decided to wait before suggesting something similar at Roosevelt.
She needed to understand this new environment before making any major moves. Her first classes went smoothly enough.
The academic standards seemed comparable to Lincoln High, and her teachers were welcoming. During lunch, she sat alone and observed the cafeteria's social landscape, noting the various groups and trying to figure out where she might fit in.
"You're new, right?" asked a voice beside her.
Sarah looked up to see a girl with kind eyes and a warm smile.
"I'm Isabella Rodriguez, but everyone calls me Izzy."
"Sarah Martinez," she replied, grateful for the friendly approach.
"Martinez? Are you Mexican-American?" Izzy asked, sitting down across from her. "My father's family was from Mexico originally, yes."
"Cool. There's a pretty active Latino student association here if you're interested. We do cultural events, community service, stuff like that." Sarah appreciated the invitation, though she wasn't sure yet what kind of involvement she wanted at her new school. At Lincoln High, her identity had been so tied to her father's military service that she had never really explored other aspects of her heritage. The first few weeks passed quietly as Sarah adjusted to her new routine. She excelled in her classes, made casual acquaintances with several students, and slowly began to feel more comfortable in the larger school environment. Her mother was thriving in her new job at the hospital, working with better resources and earning significantly more money than she had in California. Living near Sarah's grandmother had been wonderful for both of them. Abuela Maria cooked traditional family meals every Sunday, shared stories about Sarah's father's childhood, and provided the kind of emotional support that had been missing since Miguel's death. "You seem different here, Mija," her grandmother observed one Sunday afternoon as they walked through her neighborhood.
"More relaxed, maybe. I think I'm learning who I am when I'm not defined by tragedy," Sarah replied thoughtfully.
"At my old school, I was always the girl whose father died in Afghanistan. Here, I get to be just Sarah." But, even as she said it, Sarah realized she missed having a clear purpose and cause to fight for. The Military Appreciation Club had given her life meaning beyond just academic achievement. She found herself wondering if she should try to start something similar at Roosevelt High. The answer came unexpectedly during her 4th week at the new school. Sarah was walking to her car after classes when she heard raised voices near the student parking lot. "My brother's not a baby killer," a boy was shouting at a group of older students.
"He's serving our country."
"Same thing," one of the older students replied with a cruel laugh. "The military is just legal murder for people too dumb for college."
Sarah stopped walking, her protective instincts immediately activated.
The younger boy looked like he was about to cry, and the older students seemed to be enjoying his distress.
"Hey," Sarah called out, walking toward the group with authority in her voice. "Let me guess, your daddy's a jarhead too?"
Sarah felt the familiar anger rising, but she had learned how to channel it more effectively over the past year.
"My father was Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, United States Army.
He was killed in action 3 years ago while saving the lives of 3 younger soldiers." The parking lot had grown quiet as other students stopped to watch the confrontation.
Sarah could see some of them pulling out phones to record what was happening.
"So what?" the boy replied, though his voice had lost some of its confidence.
"That doesn't make him a hero. That just makes him dead."
The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but they also crystallized her understanding of what she needed to do at Roosevelt High. There were clearly students here who needed someone to stand up for them and their family's military service.
You know what?
Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot.
You're right that my father is dead. But he died protecting your right to say ignorant things like that. The least you could do is show some respect for that sacrifice.
She turned to the younger boy who had been defending his brother.
What's your name? Tommy Nguyen, he replied, wiping his eyes. Tommy, would you like to help me start a military appreciation club at this school? I think it's pretty clear we need one.
The older student sneered.
Good luck finding anyone who cares about your little war games club. Actually, said a voice from behind Sarah, I'd be interested in joining.
Sarah turned to see a girl she recognized from her chemistry class walking toward them.
I'm Katie Sullivan.
My dad is deployed in Germany right now, the girl continued, looking directly at the older boy who had been causing trouble.
And I'm tired of people acting like military service is something to be ashamed of. Count me in too, said another voice.
More students were gathering now, and several of them were expressing interest in Sarah's proposed club. Within 15 minutes, Sarah had collected names and contact information from 12 students who wanted to participate in a military appreciation organization. The older boys who had started the harassment had slunk away when it became clear that public opinion was turning against them.
How did you know how to do that? Tommy asked as the crowd dispersed. Experience, Sarah replied simply.
I spent most of last year learning how to stand up to bullies and build something positive instead of just fighting back. That evening, Sarah called Amy in California to tell her about the incident and her decision to start another military club.
I'm not surprised, Amy said. You've got this gift for bringing people together around important causes. It's like you can't help yourself. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do, Sarah mused. Maybe my father's death wasn't just a tragedy, maybe it was also a calling. The process of starting the Roosevelt High Military Appreciation Club moved much faster than it had at Lincoln High. Sarah's experience with club organization and her clear vision for the program helped her navigate the administrative requirements efficiently. Principal Santos was enthusiastic about the proposal when Sarah presented it to him the following week. We've had several incidents this year involving students making inappropriate comments about military service, he explained. Your club could help create a more respectful environment while also providing support for our military families. The club's first meeting drew 28 students, including several who had military family members they had never felt comfortable discussing before. Tommy Nguyen brought his older sister, who was considering joining the Air Force after graduation. Katie Sullivan introduced her best friend, whose uncle had been wounded in Iraq. I want our first project to be something that builds bridges between our school and the local military community, Sarah announced to the group. San Antonio has a huge military presence with several bases nearby. We should be connecting with that community. The group decided to organize a letter-writing campaign for deployed service members and plan a Veterans Appreciation event for Memorial Day. But Sarah had a bigger idea brewing in the back of her mind, something that would make a truly memorable impact. What if we could get someone from the military to visit our school, she suggested during their third meeting. Maybe someone who could talk to students about what military service really means. Like a recruiter, asked Katie. No, not a recruiter. Someone who could share their personal story and help people understand that military service isn't about politics or war, it's about people dedicating their lives to protecting others. Sarah spent several evenings researching military units stationed near San Antonio and writing letters to public affairs offices. She explained her club's mission and requested someone who might be willing to speak to high school students about military service and sacrifice. Most of the responses were polite but non-committal. However, one reply caught her attention immediately. It was from the 1st Battalion, 228th Aviation Regiment at Joint Base San Antonio Randolph, just 30 minutes from Roosevelt High School. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the unit's public affairs officer, wrote that she was interested in Sarah's program and would like to discuss possibilities for community outreach. She invited Sarah to visit the base and learn more about their aviation mission. Sarah had never been on a military base before. As she and her mother drove through the security checkpoint at Randolph Air Force Base, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was the world her father had inhabited, the community she was now trying to connect with her civilian classmates.
Captain Walsh met them at the visitor center, a professional woman in her early 30s wearing a crisp army uniform with pilot's wings on her chest. "I was very impressed by your letter, Sarah," Captain Walsh said as they walked toward the flight line. "Your club's mission aligns perfectly with our community outreach goals." "I just want people to understand what military service really means," Sarah replied. "Too many students at my school have negative attitudes about the military based on politics instead of understanding the human element." "That's exactly why we need programs like yours," Captain Walsh agreed. "Would you like to see some of our aircraft?" They spent the next hour touring the flight line, where Sarah got to see UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters up close. The massive machines were both beautiful and intimidating, their sophisticated equipment and weapons systems evidence of the serious missions they performed. "These helicopters save lives," Captain Walsh explained as they stood near one of the Black Hawks. "They evacuate wounded soldiers from combat zones, deliver supplies to remote locations, and perform search and rescue missions." Sarah touched the aircraft's hull, thinking about how machines like this might have been involved in the mission where her father died. Instead of sadness, she felt a sense of connection to the larger military community. "Captain Walsh," Sarah said suddenly, "would it be possible for one of these helicopters to visit our school?" The pilot smiled. "That's a very ambitious request. What did you have in mind?" "Something that would get every student's attention and make them think differently about military service. Something they would never forget." Captain Walsh considered this for a moment. "Let me see what I can do. We occasionally do community relations flights, and your program sounds like exactly the kind of positive outreach we want to support." 2 weeks later, Sarah received a phone call that would change everything. "Sarah, this is Captain Walsh. I have some exciting news. We've been approved for a community relations visit to Roosevelt High School. Would your club be interested in hosting a Black Hawk helicopter on your campus?" Sarah nearly dropped the phone. "Are you serious? A real helicopter would actually land at our school?" "We'd need to coordinate with your administration and make sure we have adequate space and safety measures," Captain Walsh explained. "But, yes, we can bring a UH-60 to your campus for a demonstration and student interaction." Principal Santos was initially skeptical about the idea, but his attitude changed completely when Sarah explained the educational value and community relations benefits. The school district's insurance department required additional documentation, but everyone was enthusiastic about the unique opportunity. News of the helicopter visit spread quickly through Roosevelt High, generating excitement and curiosity among students who had never shown interest in military topics before. Even some of the students who had been critical of military service seemed intrigued by the prospect of seeing a real military aircraft up close. "I can't believe you made this happen," Tommy told Sarah as they planned the event details. "This is going to be the coolest thing that's ever happened at our school." The week before the helicopter visit, Sarah decided it was time to wear her father's camouflage jacket to school again. She had avoided it for months, wanting to establish herself as more than just the military girl, but now it felt like the right time to fully embrace that identity. Walking through the hallways in the familiar jacket felt different than it had at Lincoln High. Here, students looked at her with respect rather than mockery. The jacket represented leadership and accomplishment rather than tragedy and isolation. "Is it true that a military helicopter is coming to our school because of your club?" asked a girl Sarah didn't recognize. "It's true," Sarah replied with a smile. Thursday morning on the football field. The night before the helicopter visit, Sarah could barely sleep. She kept thinking about how much her life had changed since that first Veterans Day speech at Lincoln High. From being mocked and ignored, she had somehow become a bridge between military and civilian communities. Thursday morning dawned clear and sunny, perfect weather for the demonstration flight. Sarah arrived at school early to help set up safety barriers and coordinate with the arriving news crews. The local television stations had gotten wind of the story and wanted to cover the unique school visit. At 10:30 a.m., Sarah stood on the football field with hundreds of her fellow students, looking up at the sky and listening for the distinctive sound of approaching rotors. Principal Santos had arranged for the entire school to have outdoor classes during the demonstration, and even students who had initially been skeptical about the military club were clearly excited. "There," shouted Katie Sullivan, pointing toward the horizon. "I can see it." The UH-60 Black Hawk appeared as a dark speck against the blue Texas sky, growing larger and louder as it approached Roosevelt High School. Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms as the powerful aircraft circled the campus once before beginning its approach to the football field. The helicopter settled onto the grass with a thunderous roar of engines and a whirlwind of dust and debris. Sarah watched in awe as the rotors slowly spun down and the crew began shutting down their systems. Captain Walsh climbed out of the pilot's seat and walked toward the gathered students, her helmet tucked under her arm and a broad smile on her face. Behind her, 3 other crew members began preparing the aircraft for the student tour.
Good morning, Roosevelt High School.
Captain Walsh called out, her voice carrying easily across the football field.
Who's ready to learn about Army aviation?
For the next 2 hours, students rotated through demonstrations and presentations.
They learned about helicopter mechanics, flight operations, and the various missions performed by Army aviation units.
Many students got to sit in the pilot's seat and examine the sophisticated controls and navigation equipment. But the most powerful moment came when Captain Walsh gathered all the students around the aircraft for a final presentation. This helicopter represents the dedication and sacrifice of thousands of men and women who serve our country, she said. Every flight we take, every mission we complete, is made possible by people who choose to put service before self. She gestured toward Sarah, who was standing near the front of the crowd. Your classmate Sarah Martinez embodies that same spirit of service. She's built bridges between your school and the military community, creating understanding and respect where there once was ignorance and prejudice. Her father, Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, would be very proud of what she's accomplished. The crowd of students spontaneously erupted into applause, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness this time, but tears of pride and fulfillment. As the Black Hawk prepared to depart, Tom Ingwen approached Sarah with a serious expression. I've been thinking about what I want to do after graduation, he said. I think I want to serve too. Like my brother, like your father. Sarah smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. Whatever you choose to do, make sure it's because you want to serve something bigger than yourself. That's what my father always said. The helicopter lifted off in a cloud of dust and noise, circling the school once more before disappearing toward the horizon. As Sarah watched it go, she realized that her journey wasn't about overcoming tragedy or honoring her father's memory, it was about discovering her own purpose and using her experiences to make a positive difference in the world. That evening, as she sat at her grandmother's kitchen table working on college applications, Sarah reflected on how far she had come since those early days of being mocked for wearing her father's jacket. The jacket now hung in her closet, still worn but no longer needed as armor. She had found her own strength, her own voice, and her own way of serving others. The Army scholarship would allow her to pursue her education and continue her father's legacy of military service. But, more importantly, she had learned that honoring his memory wasn't about living in the past, it was about using the values he had taught her to build a better future. As the Black Hawk had touched down on the football field that morning, it had brought with it more than just excitement and education for the students of Roosevelt High School. It had brought validation for Sarah's belief that understanding and respect could overcome prejudice and ignorance, that one person's courage could inspire an entire community to see the world differently. Sarah Martinez was no longer the girl in camouflage who was mocked at school. She had become a leader, a bridge builder, and a living example of how personal tragedy could be transformed into public service. Her father's legacy lived on not just in her memory, but in every life she touched and every mind she changed along the way.